Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Bible study. We've now begun recording, so I'll give a special shout out to Evangelos Roumeliotis and Sarah Mitchell and anyone else who I know are among our regular listeners. Where our audience is expanding. We've got two now. Yeah, exactly. No, but I'm happy to be here with all of you to hi Aragorn and Sunny. To study the Word of God together, because I think today's little lesson is going to be either really interesting or it's going to be a dud, and we're going to find out which in just a few moments. But I think we're working with some really interesting stuff. Okay, so we're coming to the end. We're finally going to finish. I'm certain this time we're going to finish the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 15, and my plan is to go through the whole Gospel of Matthew. So God willing, by the end of next year, like summer 2027, we'll have completed it. I'm trying to be more efficient, with varying levels of success, but it is worthwhile for all of you, I hope. And anytime you're reading the Bible, unless you're coming at it with in total heresy or unbelief, you're getting something out of it. It is benefiting you in some way, whether you understand it or not. I do believe that.
I will say, I like the slow.
You like the slow thing?
Yeah,
okay.
When I'm reading, usually I go a lot faster.
Yeah.
So I'm taking it really slow and group. I love it.
Well, that's something I've noticed too. I mean, I've read the Gospels, gosh, how many times, and certain passages even more times than that, and I'm still finding new things. Individual words or phrasings or something. That is what is really interesting about all this. Okay, so chapter 15, we'll just launch right in, except to say that we just finished the section on Jesus's interactions with the Canaanite woman. Also, in the other Gospels, she's referred to as the Syrophoenician woman. She was a Gentile woman from Tyre and Sidon, and Jesus really at first, she comes to him asking for her daughter to be healed. And first he's silent to her. Then he kind of apparently insults her for being a Gentile, a non-Jew. And she takes it all in stride, shows her humility, and then Jesus praises her faith and heals her daughter. So that's the context of this. And we said this is a significant moment, not just because Jesus did a nice thing, but specifically who and where he was doing the miracle. He did a miracle for a Gentile woman in a Gentile land. We remember we said the land of Tyre and Sidon, what's now modern day Lebanon, was outside of the promised land. It was no longer within the boundaries of the promised land of God's chosen people, Israel. So it's showing that the covenant is expanding. God is including non-Jews, non-Israelites in the work he's doing. And that's part of, why Jesus came. So it's very, very significant. Yes, Nectarius.
The word Canaanites is a more Hebrew term, whereas Syrophoenicians more like a Greek term. That could kind of show like two different shades, like one for the Jews, like Jesus helped a Gentile woman, and then on the Greek side of things, Jesus helped someone from out there instead of just being like contained in the small region of the world.
That's a really good point, and this is a subtle thing that's coming up. She's called a Canaanite, a woman from Canaan. In Matthew's gospel. Remember, we said Matthew's gospel is the most quote-unquote Jewish gospel because it was written primarily to a Jewish audience. It's believed the original gospel of Matthew was written in Hebrew, although we don't have any written evidence of that. But Matthew's gospel is the most Jewish gospel, and he refers to it as a Canaanite woman. Hi, Sarah, glad to have you. He refers to her as a Canaanite woman in that gospel to kind of show, because Canaanites were like the hated enemies of the Israelites. They were cursed by God, because of Ham's sin in Genesis. So it really is, bringing in that Hebrew context. And you're right, in the Gospel of Mark, which I'm not positive we know for certain who the direct audience of the Gospel of Mark was, but it was a more non-Jewish audience. And in that case, he doesn't call her a Canaanite. He calls her a Syrophoenician woman. Again, same people, but different, kind of understanding of who they are. Anyway, so Jesus healed. So Jesus just healed the Canaanite woman, and he was in Gentile territory. Now he's coming back to Israel, to the promised land, although not fully. We'll see what that means in a minute. So we're in Gospel of Matthew, chapter 15, verse 29. Jesus departed from there, skirted the Sea of Galilee, and went up on the mountain and sat down there. Then great multitudes came to him, having with them the lame, the blind, the mute, the maimed, and many others. And they laid them down at Jesus' feet, and he healed them. So the multitude marveled when they saw the mute speaking, the maimed made whole, the lame walking, the blind seeing, and they glorify the God of Israel. Okay, so what is it talking about? we're going to pull up our handy map. I'm sure there's a more efficient way to do this than just holding up a printed map to the screen, but right now this is the best we got, and we're grateful for it. So we said Jesus is in Syrophoenicia. He's up in the region of Tyre and Sidon. He's in Gentile territory. Now he's moving down. It says he's skirting the Sea of Galilee, and he's coming down somewhere. He's somewhere around here. How do we know that? Because this sequence of events is not just recorded in this gospel, it's also recorded in Mark and Mark's gospel, and not Luke's gospel, but it's recorded in Mark's gospel. So that's where we know. So remember, all four gospels show a lot of the same events from different angles. So they fill in details that the other ones lacked. So this gospel, the Gospel of Matthew that we're reading, it doesn't say where Jesus went. It just said he skirted the Sea of Galilee. But the Gospel of Mark gives us the clue. It's probably in the region of the Decapolis. Remember, what we said in the past is the Decapolis is a Gentile region. By the way, this, I believe, is in the modern country of what's now Jordan. So you have modern Israel, Palestine over here. I believe this would be Jordan, because it's the king. What's now the Kingdom of Jordan used to be called Transjordan. What does Transjordan means? It's across the Jordan. Here's the Jordan, and it's on the other side. Okay, now you understand. So Jesus went down to the region of the Decapolis. He's out in the wilderness again, and he went up on a mountain and sat down there. So we know that. I just wanted to point out, of course, it doesn't say which mountain, but the fact that he's on a mountain is significant again and again in the Bible. The place where God is encountered on a mountain is like very, very frequent. So obviously, the first big revelation is of God on Mount Sinai. The Israelites go out into the wilderness. They come to Mount Sinai. God comes down in a big cloud on Mount Sinai, and he gives Moses the Ten Commandments. Right? You've all seen that picture of Charlton Heston coming down the mountain. It's been satirized in an infinite amount of cartoons. Moses coming down the mountains with 2 tablets. Well, that's where it's from. It's Moses coming down on Mount Sinai. But Mount Moriah was where Abraham was commanded to sacrifice his son Isaac. Mount Zion was where David built the city of Jerusalem. Mount Carmel is where Elijah went up. Mount Tabor is where Jesus was transfigured. The Mount of Olives, I believe, is is the place from which he ascended into heaven. Encounters with God happen on mountains a lot, and like unique things that don't happen on the level places usually, right? So God came down on Mount Sinai in a way that he didn't, come to other places. Jesus was transfigured on top of Mount Tabor in a way he was not transfigured anywhere else. No, there was no other place they saw him. Unique things happen at the top of mountains. Yes.
It's interesting you mentioned how they happen at the top, mountains and not in the level places, because where was Sodom and Gomorrah? In a plain. It got destroyed.
Wow.
Where was Gehenna? In a valley. Where all the debauchery was happening. That was in a valley, So maybe the low places kind of have like an opposite.
Absolutely. That's really good. That's a really good point. So it's not just that the high places are associated with good, but it's actually the low places are associated with evil.
Didn't the third of the angels, didn't they land on Mount Hermon though?
I don't remember specifically. I to be honest, I don't know that reference, so I don't want to speak to it in ignorance. High places were a place to encounter divinity, but there are situations where the divinity encountered is not necessarily good, right? So one of the issues that comes up, and it sounds like an obscure thing, but when you actually read the Old Testament, it comes up again and again and again, which is that the Israelites are commanded to worship only at the temple or the tabernacle. And all the time, they're going to worship God in other places. They're called high places. So the Israelites, they're supposed to worship God only in the one high place, which is on Mount Zion, but they're going to all kinds of high places and sacred groves and worshiping other gods there. So there are high places where deities are encountered, but it's not necessarily God. It's another thing, Stylianos brought it up in a previous class, but what is the Tower of Babel? The Tower of Babel is a counterfeit mountain. It's a counterfeit high place, and that's why God destroyed it. It's because human beings were trying to create a mountain so that they could talk to God create a mountain so that they could talk to God on their own terms. Yes.
This again brushes on because he's up the mountain. You have to want it bad enough to go up that mountain.
Absolutely, and that's
He's not sitting at the base where it would be the easiest thing to get to him. He's sitting at the top.
Yes, absolutely, and that's a really good point.
You can't heal people who don't want to be healed.
You have, and that's an important symbolism here, is you have to go up to Jesus, and and that's not an easy thing, right? Sometimes Jesus goes out and finds people. That is true. So there, and we see that in our own lives. Sometimes we have the sense that God does something for us or reaches out for us when we were not looking for him and we're not trying to find him. However, much more often, I believe it's the case, God only reveals himself to the people who make the effort, who leave, because in order to go up on a high place, you have to depart the city. You have to depart civilization and enter into, an unpopulated place and find him up there. There's a process of ascent, right? I mean, the big spiritual manual of the Orthodox Church is called the Ladder of Divine Ascent. Going to God requires an upward motion, and it's strenuous, like you said. It's arduous. You have to put in effort. You have to put in work. Otherwise, you're not meeting him, right? You're not, and you have to think of it, especially. I mean, there's almost a sort of irony that they're bringing up the maimed to God. They have to carry like the physically crippled up the mountain. Wouldn't it be a lot nicer if he would just come down, and meet them where they're at? But that's not what's happening. The blind as well. People with, and that's kind of our condition. We have to ascend to God, but we don't often have the, physical resource, the spiritual resources to do it. Yes.
Another thing is that these people are highly unlikely to be doing this all by themselves. And if nothing else, then they're going in a big group. They're not going by themselves up that mountain. They're going in groups, and people are probably helping a lot of them get to where they need to be. That's
another beautiful reading. Yes, exactly. And it's come up especially in Jesus's healing of the paralytic. All the church fathers commenting on, the paralytic didn't get himself to Jesus. His four friends had to carry him. And so salvation is what? Salvation, what can we get from this physical symbolism? Again, nothing has been said. Jesus doesn't go up on a mountain and say, hey, I'm on a mountain because you have to climb up to me. And it's a metaphor. Get it? Like, he just does it. And we infer it. But you're right. We have to, the ascent to Jesus requires effort, and it's something that's not really done alone in general. Yes.
Wasn't there a story about, 3 wise men going up the mountain to find the symbol of Jesus? Because if you go up the higher the mountains, the more possibilities you'll see Jesus by the Star of David, looking at the Star of David.
I think that is not entirely the story of the wise men as I know it. But there's something there, which is that the wise men, to find Jesus, they had to go on a long, arduous journey. I mean, full of effort and also risk. I mean, it was dangerous to travel the roads, and you had to do it in a large caravan. So yeah, I think there's definitely something there. Now, one of the things I do want to get out of the way, though, is a lot of people, they read this and they think, well, that's because ancient people were stupid. They thought God was up and Satan was down, and so climbing a mountain, yeah, you're going to find him up there. I've heard people on, say, well, Reddit to your argument, exactly. I've heard, people say on, with regards to, Mount Olympus is not a very high mountain. It's actually rather easily climbable, as far as I know. And, people would, I've heard people on the internet comments, well, if the Greeks thought their gods were up on Mount Olympus, why didn't they ever go and check? And I think it's a misunderstanding. And a lot of our misunderstandings come from the fact is we through our post-Enlightenment period education, assume that ancient people were very, very dumb. And that is a mistake. That is a mistake. It's true, they didn't know everything we do. And specifically with regard to certain scientific facts, we know more than they do, right? But at the same time, they were a lot more sophisticated and a lot deeper understanding of these things. So for instance, you can go back to the 4th century long before the first telescopes were invented, long before the first space flight. And you can see like the church fathers saying, hey guys, angels don't have literal wings. They're metaphorical because they ascend spiritually, not physically. They knew God didn't live in the clouds. They knew it wasn't a matter of just like getting a really tall ladder or something. They were aware that God is something, you know, the language we might use now is another dimension or something. But they were aware of it. They knew that God was more than just physically up. So that come in the context of this, you know, it's like, okay, we know that, but honestly, this is the kind of thing that needs to be continuously dispelled. I'm going to share with you guys a famous wait. Sorry, I'm trying to share my screen and I always end up doing something wrong when I do that. Share.
They might have lacked facts or whatever, but they didn't lack wisdom.
Right, exactly. And can you guys see this? Can you guys see the Russian poster that I'm putting up?
Yes.
Okay. Here, this is a famous this is a famous Soviet propaganda poster from remember the Soviet Union had the first man in space, a man named Yuri Gagarin. And you see him, he's going up into space, and what is he saying? He's saying Boga нет. There is no God. Yeah, there is no God. And notice he's flying above specifically the Orthodox churches and more minorly above the Catholic churches and the mosques. You know, this is the one they were against. Here's another one. It's, you know, ostensibly another quote. It says it's poetic. Небо осмотрели и внутри, и наружно. Никаких богов, ни ангелов не обнаружено. So the basically the sky has been inspected both inside and outside, and no gods or angels were observed. And this was actually these are not just in these posters, but you can actually find it floating around in a lot of Soviet propaganda, even apparently in the biography of Yuri Gagarin, which again was probably heavily doctored by the state, but says like, when Yuri Gagarin went up into space, he got tons of letters from former Christian believers saying, wow, we can't believe he went up there and there was no God up there and he totally destroyed our faith. And it's like these sort of like asinine ideas are really out there. That people are saying, oh, Christians, you know, they just thought God was up and hell was down, and then when science proved them wrong, they changed the story. It's not true. It's not true. You can go and read the ancient sources long before any of the scientific knowledge in there. They would say God is not physical, God is not material, he does not abide in any place, heaven is not a place, not a place in our physical world. So I'm just countering that. Now, that being said, heaven is up symbolically and spiritually, right? So so these things are connected, but even all I'm trying to say is that even the people at the time had an understanding that this was symbolic or spiritual. It was not literal. If that makes any sense. Yeah. Now, even in the modern day, you know, I was reading a story. You know, there's a great individual who I believe is a saint of the Orthodox Church named Elder Ephraim. He passed away in 2019, very, very recently. He knew about, people walking in space. He knew about ostensibly the existence of many, many galaxies and this and that. And nevertheless, he described certain spiritual experiences he had as though he were in his cell of his monastery. The roof was ripped off. He was sucked up into the sky and then, and ended up in heaven. And, he was in heaven and he interacted with some people in heaven. This was, a powerful mystical experience. He knew about all that space stuff. He knew about space flight and stuff. And, he believed it as far as we know. He wasn't a flat earther or anything. But nevertheless, when he had this mystical experience, he still experienced heaven as upward and something to do with the sky and something to do with the roof being ripped off of his, of where he was. So there's something about the spiritual world that still corresponds to the physical world as we experience it, even though it's not identical. Yes.
I was reminded of something you had told us the other time about how this one lady, after so many years of reciting the Nicene Creed, had only grasped one of the key truths in that creed by actually like watching like some evangelical minister on the TV talk about it.
I appreciate that someone listens to me when I talk. Thank you, Nectarius. Yeah, that is a real thing that happened. I would visit when I was at my old church. I would visit with this Greek woman in her 90s, lovely woman. I'd bring her Holy Communion, because she could no longer physically make it to church. And we'd talk, and she said one day to me, she's a lifelong Orthodox Christian. She said to me one day, "Father, did you know Jesus is going to come again?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I just found out about it." And I said, "You've been 90 years going to church. You've said, he will come again with glory to judge the living and the dead. Every single Sunday you said that. What did you think it meant?" And she said, "Well, I never really thought about it." So first of all, it shows what a poor job we've done in history in the Orthodox Church of catechizing our people. That's on us. But at the same time, it opens up some lessons. I think partly that there are new dimensions. She was still fully an Orthodox Christian, right? No one so far has come to me and said, actually, that woman was a heretic, and she, was a blasphemer and this, that. No, she was just a person who's not fully educated, but she was still fully and completely an Orthodox Christian. She's still, and I believe even if she, was in a state of grace spiritually, and if she would have died before she had that realization, she still would have gone to heaven. There's not going to be a theology test at the pearly gates. Anyway, I don't really remember where I'm going with this, but it's an interesting story. Sorry.
Revelation, isn't it?
What?
Just because Revelation isn't mentioned in the liturgy at all.
No, because
I'm just joking.
Oh yeah, because Jesus talks about the second coming throughout the canonical Gospels.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, Esther.
There are actually multiple things that we cannot replicate that the ancient peoples that we have artifacts of. Like, we can't figure out how they perfectly drove a hole through stone in the age that they did, because we can't replicate it with any of the things that they would have had. The closest we can get is with a drill powered by something mechanical that's also adding water, but they didn't have that technology, and it's not comparable to them drilling a stick side to side because it's too precise.
Yeah.
I can't figure out what they did to do that. They weren't stupid, they just worked differently.
That's a great point, is that there's a lot of funky ancient inventions that we don't necessarily we don't necessarily know how the ancient people got the knowledge they did, but they certainly were doing something right. I think there's a battery they found in Baghdad. I don't know the details of that one so much. Maybe it's exaggerated. I don't know, but can you explain that? It's like the funky Greek thing.
It's a celestial map where they're like tracking the stars and everything like that, but it's all fully mechanical. Which is really cool. Like the ratios are all perfect and everything, and it's just
so it's an ancient Greek celestial map they found at the bottom of the ocean, right?
It was in a shipwreck.
Like and it's just a really sophisticated device for 2,000 years ago that mapped the stars very well.
More complicated than a clock. Cool.
Very interesting. So anyway, ancient peoples weren't stupid. They were wrong about some things. So I'm not also saying that they were perfectly enlightened geniuses, but they were. At least they were more sophisticated than we get them credit for. Nevertheless, heaven is still up and hell is down. Our physical reality does map on to spiritual reality in some way, even if they're not, one-to-one identical. Okay, on to the second verse. Oh,
yeah, I was just thinking this. I think there's something else too, to like the idea of, when you go up into a mountain, even the air itself is thinner. I was thinking kind of like, you're escaping Earth's atmosphere in a way. And I mean, if you go up to some mountain, you can't even breathe at the top. It's Mount Everest or whatever. Right?
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Maybe there's something there. I've heard like that whole idea of like a thin space before, like modern New Agey people like to parrot that, but they're actually kind of onto something there.
Well, there are definitely such a thing as thin spaces. They're right in the sense of like this concept where there are these places where it seems like spiritual stuff just happens more often.
Yeah.
And I think it's places where, there's a lot of prayer concentrated or a lot of holy things. Mount Athos, I think, is like that. I think the Holy Land is like that. I've heard of some like crazy things happening in the Holy Land that just which makes sense, I suppose. But it just seems like a place that's more saturated with just miracles and strange phenomena than like Roanoke, Virginia, for example. but just because of everything that's taken place there. I love Roanoke. Don't get me wrong. And I think Roanoke has the potential to become a thin space, right? If we saturate it with prayer, and but we make ourselves saints anyway. But anyway, and Jesus went up the mountain and he sat down there. Just a little note is that sitting is the traditional posture of teaching and authority. So it's not that don't think he sat down there because he was tired and resting. Think he is not exactly enthroning himself like a king, but like positioning himself as a teacher and a wise man or something.
He kind of is, right? I mean, the people are coming to him with like sickness and everything, and they want
Well, that's
to
true. I mean,
it's
maybe it is enthronement in a certain sense.
at least I read this almost as like a type of judgment, and that the people who are showing up, they're asking for mercy from him. That's what it said.
There might be more to that than you even realize. As we get on, yes, it may be a type of, because you would cast judgment from a seated position as well.
Especially on love.
And but yeah, from an elevated place, it almost is like a judge or a king or something. Yeah, and what was I going to say? Oh yeah, and so historically, if you're imagining like the church fathers or whatever preaching, they were sitting, you were standing. And which is really interesting because right now I preach standing and you guys are sitting. Maybe we should switch it. It would be more restful for me.
Really emphasizing the point that he's king. He's in an elevated place, sitting while everybody else stands.
Yeah,
that's also a position for a king.
It's a very authoritative position. That's true. That's true. Then great multitudes came to him, having with them the lame, the blind, mute, maimed, and many others. And they laid them down at Jesus' feet, and he healed them. Okay, so the multitude marveled when they saw the mute speaking, the maimed made whole, the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they glorified the God of Israel. So this is interesting, actually, because one of the things I realized, the maimed, so what are these issues? Well, the lame, we would say, what does lame mean? Someone who is unable to or has difficulty walking. Blind, you know what blind is. Mute, we've said, means deaf mute, probably an inability both to hear and to speak. Someone who doesn't know how to speak because they were never able to hear, so they never, learned language or whatever. Maimed, I guess we would call that like amputees or people missing limbs or having deformities like that, and many others. So, what?
Missing an eye or something.
Oh yeah, that's true. Missing any part of you that should be there. But anyway, I had said in the past that Jesus never heals amputees in the Bible, and I actually take that back because it sounds like he does. The Bible doesn't use the same vocabulary, but the maimed would refer to people who are missing limbs, probably. So the multitude marveled when they saw the mute speaking, the maimed made whole. Now, one of the things, there's a couple things going on. One is just these people have a lot of problems. And Jesus is being very, very nice by healing them. It's an example of his compassion. It's an example of his goodness and his kindness. And it's an example of his power, right? He is doing things that, no one at the time could do. Even if some of these issues might be fixable in the modern day with a ton of surgery and expensive equipment and really skilled doctors, Jesus was doing it, to many people spontaneously and instantly. So it's a demonstration, that he has some kind of power that ordinary humans do not have. But also we've said in the past that the specific things God heals are noteworthy. And part of this is, various fathers commenting on this is just, blindness is, these are all things these are all capacities we need to have to interact with God properly, right? We need to be able to see God and to hear him, and to be physically fit so that we can serve him and do his will. So it's interesting, reading the fathers, they're saying, well, God is healing these people so that they can pray to him and so that they can praise him. And it's very interesting because, that's what the fathers, and that's what the monastics of our church, I really enjoy interacting with the monks and nuns of the Orthodox Church because they're all just zeroed in on the one thing that's important. They don't care about anything else. It's just, everything's just about salvation, salvation, salvation. They don't care about what's going on in the world. They don't care about what's on TV. They don't care about, anything. It's just, let God, everything. And so reading this, the father's just like, okay, great that you're no longer deaf mute. Now you can pray. Great that you're no longer blind. Now you can see an icon. That's what they care about. And it's very interesting because like ontologically, that's all that really matters. God did not restore their sight so that they could go watch the hippodrome races or so that they could see a beautiful sunset. Of course, it's helped them work and stuff and make a living and probably, but their core existential need is for that encounter with God. So we've also said that these are metaphors for spiritual illness, right? Healing. God heals our spiritual blindness, which is to say, our unbelief, our inability to see God is our inability to believe in Him, or at least to believe in Him fully and properly. Our deaf muteness is our inability to pray to or interact with God properly. So even if our eyes and ears even if our ears and mouth are working just fine, almost all of us are deficient with regards to prayer in some way. We don't have the ready, immediate access to God that we would like, and that the holy people do have. So Jesus is healing them of that. To be maimed, to be crippled would be something about, physically serving God, right? And God helps us to do His will in our own lives, even though when we're too weak of our own ability to overcome our sins, to do good for other people, God gives us the strength and gives us the opportunity to do His will in the world. So in that sense, even if we're not physically crippled, He heals our spiritual lameness by enlightening us to do good. However, this also was it this book that I brought over? Yes. Okay. This also has this specific list, shall we say, of illnesses. It has reference to a specific prophecy, and this is the Gospel of Isaiah, chapter 35. So I'm going to read the chapter in its entirety. It's not super long. So this is Isaiah, and just so you understand, the prophecies, especially what we call the major prophecies, like Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Jeremiah, are a series of communications from God to the people of Israel. And especially those three I mentioned, Ezekiel, Isaiah, and Jeremiah, are all, on the same theme of, you guys have been sinning a lot. Judgment is coming, and it's going to be bad. But then there will be a restoration afterwards. This is like the very consistent theme of the prophets. And they're all speaking around the destruction of Jerusalem in the period of time immediately before and after Jerusalem gets destroyed by the Babylonians in 570 BC. I can't actually remember. But they're saying, you're being judged for your sins. You deserve it. You've been sinning a lot. You're going to be judged for your sins, but there will be a final restoration. That's where we get the concept. I mean, it's not the only place. That's where we get the concept of the Messiah, of a restored kingdom of Israel. Is all of these prophecies that say, hey, things are bad now, but they're going to be good. God is going to redeem His people. Anyway, so this is Isaiah chapter 35, and it's talking about this period of restoration. So the preceding chapter was all about judgment, and now we're through the message about judgment. Now it's a message of restoration. Be glad, you thirsty desert, and rejoice exceedingly, and let the desert blossom as a lily. The desert places of the Jordan shall blossom abundantly and rejoice exceedingly. The glory of Lebanon and the honor of Carmel shall be given to it, and my people shall see the glory of the Lord and the majesty of our God. Be strong, you relaxed hands and feeble knees. Be comforted, you faint-hearted. Be strong and do not fear. Behold, our God renders judgment and will render it. He will come and save us. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the ears shall hear. The ears of the deaf shall hear. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the dumb will speak clearly. For water shall. Did you catch that? Did you catch that? So God is talking about the restoration of Israel. So the redemption, when things are going to finally get good again. And He lists these specific illnesses. Then He says, the lame will leap like a deer, the tongue of the dumb will speak. The eyes of the blind shall be open, the ears of the deaf shall hear. He's talking about all these illnesses right here, this specific list. So that's why when Jesus is up here healing all of these illnesses, there might have been plenty of other illnesses Jesus heals. And of course, one I was hearing a thing about recently, and historically, so many people died of diarrhea. We never hear about Jesus healing someone from that. And of course, there are other problems that people had. When the Gospels talk about the specific illnesses, that Jesus heals them of, it's because there's a symbolic meaning to that particular illness. And in this case, it's connecting it to this prophecy. But notice the other stuff it says. He's saying, be glad, you thirsty desert, and rejoice exceedingly, let the desert blossom of lily. They're in the desert. They are in the desert, but it's not even that. They're in the desert places of the Jordan, which we said, I said he's right here in the country that's now Jordan. You like it? I'm circling back to what we were saying in the beginning. That he's in the desert places of the Jordan. Not only that, but it says the glory of Lebanon and the honor of Carmel should be given to it. Well, Jesus literally came from Lebanon to the desert place of the Jordan, and he healed the blind, the lame, and the so on and so forth. So really, there's a big connection to this prophecy. There's a big connection, a big thematic connection to this prophecy. But actually, it goes even deeper than that, and we'll get to it. But I just wanted to tell you that when Matthew singles out these illnesses, he's connecting it specifically to this prophecy in Isaiah, and he's saying, look, you Jews, my fellow Jews, what was prophesied is happening. You better get on board with the idea of Jesus as the Messiah, because he's doing all the things that God said he would. And so, but more than that, I think the theme actually goes deeper, because what just happened before we said Jesus went out to this place and healed all these people? We said he came from the land of the Gentiles, and he had the interaction with the Canaanite woman, the Gentile woman, where he was kind of, almost rude to her, and she showed her humility, and then he healed her. Well, the chapter right before in Isaiah is actually a chapter of judgment on the Gentiles. A judgment on the Gentiles. So so here's what chapter 34 says. I might not read the whole thing. Come here, you nations. That means Gentiles. In goy in Hebrew means nation, but it refers to a non-Jew. And this exact same habit got translated into Greek. So anywhere it says the nations in the Bible, you should not just read that as the nations like, America, Afghanistan, Trinidad and Tobago. You should read it as the non-Jews. Come near, you nations, and listen, you rulers. Let the earth hear, and those in it, the inhabited earth and the people therein. For the anger of the Lord is against all the nations, and his wrath against all the number of them, to destroy them utterly and to deliver them over for slaughter. Their slain and their dead shall be thrown out. Their stench shall rise from their dead bodies, and the mountains shall be drenched in their blood. Heaven shall also be rolled up like a scroll, and all the stars shall fall like leaves from a vine, as leaves fall from a fig tree. So the passage immediately preceding the one about restoration is a passage of judgment on the Gentiles. And that is almost what Jesus just did. He was just in the land of the Gentiles, and he passed judgment on the Gentiles. But that judgment was turned into mercy. So my interpretation of this is that there's a deep thematic connection between Isaiah 34 and 35 and what we just read in Matthew 15, except with a twist. And it's showing that God's mercy is on display, and God's mercy in Jesus Christ is triumphing over his judgment. God is passing judgment on the Gentiles, but in so doing, he's actually redeeming. He passed judgment on that woman and called her a little dog, and then in her humility, her judgment turned into redemption. So I think there's a fascinating connection here, and a fascinating connection and a fascinating twist going on. And it just kind of tracks with the broader arc of what we're going to read. I'm going to move on now because we do have to finish the chapter tonight. Okay. All right. Feeding the 4,000. Now Jesus called his disciples to himself and said, I have compassion on the multitude because they have now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And I do not want to send them away hungry, lest they faint on the way. Then his disciples said to him, where could we get enough bread in the wilderness to fill such a great multitude? Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you have? They said to him, 7 and a few little fish. So he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground, and he took 7 loaves and fish and gave them thanks, broke them and gave them to his disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitude. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 7 large baskets and full of the fragments that were left. Now those who ate were 4,000 men, besides women and children. And he sent away the multitude, got into the boat, and came to the region of Magdala. Okay. First, just a few things just out of the way. Jesus, he's out in the wilderness. These crowds are following him. He's teaching them. And they've continued with him 3 days without eating or drinking, or at least out eating or drinking things that they didn't bring themselves. That's a long time to go hungry. That's a long time. And it adds to kind of what Esther was saying earlier, which is that the path to God requires effort. And dare I say, it requires ascetic effort. It requires physical self-denial in terms of food and drink. You know, that's one of the biggest complaints I get about Orthodoxy from our people, is about all the fasting. That's one of the biggest complaints I have about Orthodoxy, is that we fast so much. And nevertheless, it's part of the deal. That's part of the authentic path to Christ, is it requires, you know, physical self-control. And we're so bad at it. We're so bad at it that we need to learn it. And that's why the church gives us the fasting calendar. And that's why, so the revelation of God's power comes after ascetic endurance. So they don't get to see this miracle until after they've borne. Now, they did see the other miracles, to be fair, but they don't get to see this miracle of the feeding of the 4,000 until after they've borne with him and they've endured for a little while. But it also, it's interesting, those following and listening to Christ can even forget to eat. I've heard that about holy people. Sometimes they become so absorbed in God, in the vivid and direct experience of God, it just gets rid of their physical needs. They don't eat or drink, or they forget to. They forget about taking care of anything, and they just are so absorbed in that experience. What's that experience like? Well, I really don't know. You know, I haven't experienced God directly in that way, but apparently it's better than anything else. It's better. It's so good. You forget even your very physical needs, and that's a taste of, you know, what we're hoping to receive in heaven. And also, you know, there's a, you know, much more small practical consideration, but we've said that these examples of Jesus feeding the multitudes are, you know, they're types of communion. And notice that the people fasted before they received communion, and that's what we do too. Yes, Marshall.
So, is there a parallel here between Christ and these people and God with Moses? It's like
Yeah.
so like how he sustained Moses, and now Christ is now sustaining the multitudes.
That's really good. Yeah, so there's two things going on there. One is that when Moses went up Mount Sinai to receive the 10 Commandments, he actually was there for 40 days without eating and drinking. So that gives us to understand that in some way God nourished Moses, because that's obviously a supernatural amount of time not to eat and drink. Maybe you could get away with not eating, but certainly not drinking water. But also God, you know, fed the people of Israel in the wilderness with manna that came down from heaven. And that's what Jesus is feeding a large crowd of people in the wilderness. He is imitating the works of Yahweh, the God of Israel, which again, yeah, he never comes out and says the sentence, I am God. I saw a really, really frustrating, you know, debate. I don't do online debates. I really, but somehow I got roped into watching a debate between a Christian and Muslim guy. And the Muslim guy, he's just like, show me where in the Bible Jesus ever says I'm God. Show me wherever the Bible, it's like, he never says the sentence, I am God. Right. Okay. You got us there. If you actually substantively dig into the text, you see, oh my God, that's, you know, blasphemy. Oh my goodness, it's everywhere. Oh my goodness, you know, Jesus is revealing his divine character all the time, but that doesn't translate into a sound bite. And what people want on YouTube debates are sound bites. They want one sentence where Jesus, now actually he does pretty much say, I am God in the book of Revelation. And that's why this Christian guy, you know, really nailed the Muslim guy in the debate. Although again, the guy wasn't listening, you know, he had his own sound bites memorized. And so this, I don't do internet debates. I can't stand it. But Jesus is revealing his divine character all the time. He's identifying himself with the actions of the God of Israel all the time. Again, if you familiarize yourself with the stories, if you familiarize yourself with the context, if you just want one sentence sound bites, you know, you won't get there. You get in kind of what you put out. You get out what you kind of put in. Yes.
I guess kind of is one soundbite. John chapter 10, verse 30. I am the Father, our one.
I know, but the soundbite people, they have a response to that one. You know, all the short ones, they have a you know, a quick little thing they can, you know, they have clapbacks. That's what we have. You know, that's what we have. The modern day, we don't have intellectual debates. We have clapbacks. So, you know, again, you can't really learn the Bible through sound bites. Anyway, but yeah, that one did come up in the debate, and it's just like, well, he has a different interpretation. He says, leaving it. Okay. All right. Now, and of course, notice that the disciples give the the bread to the multitude, right? Jesus does not personally distribute it. And this is God's mode of interaction with human beings throughout history. You know, in the Old Testament, God speaks to the people 9 times out of 10 through a prophet. God distributes the bread through the apostles. I mean, you could wonder to yourself, how come, you know, in every church, you don't just show up on Sunday and there's Jesus standing there and he tells you everything you need to know, and then you get to take a bite out of him. I think they're like logical and spiritual reasons why that is not or could not be the case. But you do have to look at this and think like, okay, this has something to do with how God structured the world. God, when he created the world and founded it before all time, he chose to set things up in such a way that he's operating constantly through mediators. He's constantly operating through prophets to communicate his message. He's operating through the priests and the bishops to distribute the Holy Eucharist. It's even in not just human beings, but it's in angels. He delivers the message of the incarnation to Mary through an angel. Mary actually never speaks directly to God during that passage, if you notice, which is again, I think another example of why it's completely acceptable to pray to the saints, because Mary has the entire interaction with an angel, not with God himself, and it's still anyway. God interacts with the world through intermediaries. I think partly because, you know, we're so weighed down by sin and stuff that it's like this tremendous barrier between us and him, and it also is partly to, you know, give us our free will to choose him or not to choose him, because if God were just floating there in the sky at all times, you would never sin ever. He would, you know, imagine like you go to sin and he's just like, no. And it's like, well, you would so we would not actually exercise free will, right? We would not be free to create ourselves. We would just do whatever the, you know, floating God in the sky says. That's why he hides, and it's an important part of why he hides himself. But just remember this: God chooses to interact with the world largely through intermediaries, at least at this stage in history. You know, in the age to come, it'll be a bit different. Yes.
He also gives us the power to bring more glory to heaven through our actions, like Moses, like Noah, like what was the others?
Joseph, yeah.
And so on and so forth. He gives us the opportunities, and whether or not we take them is up to us, but he's handing it to us if we just take it.
Well, I think you're right. I think it gives more glory to God. Why? Because in the process, he is creating other little gods in his own image. And the only way we could be other little gods is if we are also exercising freedom the way he exercises freedom. If we were just automata, it wouldn't be as glorious as a bunch of, you know, small g gods living in harmony with the one creator. Yes, Marshall.
Would it be a stretch to say that this is similar to God and Moses, the way God commands Moses to deliver the 10 Commandments to Israel, and that way he's feeding the people, and through his laws, now he's kind of in a way acting through the apostles like Moses to now in a more literal sense feed the people.
Absolutely. I don't know if you were here for our discussion on the feeding of the 5,000, but we said basically exactly that. There's a thematic connection already established in the Gospel of Matthew from I think it was chapter 3. You know, when Satan tempts Jesus in the wilderness, says, you know, if you're the Son of God, command that these stones become bread. And Jesus says, man will not live off bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. There's a thematic connection between bread and the law of God that is established there. There's something that nourishes us from the law of God the way bread nourishes our bodies. So it is absolutely not a stretch to say that Moses nourished the people and through the communication of the commandments. There's some kind of connection here. And I think, I don't know, I mean, I think there's some way we kind of viscerally feel this, right? I mean, David in the Psalm says, I thirst for the living God. And I sometimes feel my longing for God as though it is a hunger or a thirst. Not necessarily in the sense I want to take a bite out of God, although I want to do that too, you know, every Sunday. But just there's some kind of analogy between our desire for God and our need for actual physical nourishment. That's the thing. We live in, you know, what's sometimes been called a disenchanted world, or we have a disenchanted worldview. We as modern Western people don't see things as inherently symbolic. But with the worldview that's espoused in the Bible is deeply, deeply symbolic. There's a deep correspondence between physical things and spiritual things. And it's not a matter of opinion, and it's not a projection our minds put there, but there's some kind of real ontological connection between the physical world and the spiritual world, you know? Yes.
Okay, so I might have another stretch here. So anyway, so when the people go out with Jesus, they're depriving themselves for a while, and then they are later fed. In a spiritual sense, the way God sometimes we have to go out of our way to God. We are, I guess, in a physical state, and I guess spiritual sometimes where we hit like lows, and then the way God sustains us is later, I guess, in a way, I guess, maybe seeing the sin within ourselves. Only then can we truly pray deeper and then allow God to, I guess, lift us back up again. Now he is taking these people out and then feeding them in the same sense.
Yeah, the time we go without nourishment, I think, is important for our development. Absolutely. And that includes our period of spiritual dryness as well as our period without physical nourishment. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Now, what is going on here? Because I've seen criticisms, especially, we're going to run over an hour. I'm sorry, we've hit an hour, probably another 15 minutes. If anyone needs to go, God bless you. I understand. Obviously, there's truly nothing keeping you here. But I'm glad you all are with me. There's one last issue I want to get to, but I think it'll be fruitful, which is that, didn't we just see all this happen? One chapter previous, we saw the feeding of the 5,000, and now there's a feeding of the 4,000. I mean, critics of the Gospels definitely say, this shows that they're not inerrant or inspired or whatever, because clearly they just recorded the same event twice. In different, or they got reports about the same event twice, and they double recorded it. Yes, Marshall?
Oh, I was going to say, also the commandments had to be given twice.
Wow, that's interesting. That's really interesting. That's something I didn't catch when I was doing this. That's really good, because the first, we compared the first feeding of the 5,000 with the giving of the commandments. Why? Because Jesus fed the people from 5 loaves, and we said that corresponded to the 5 books of the law, and not just us, but the church fathers said that. And now this is like a second giving of the law. Wow, that's really good. That's really good. I had not come across that. I had not but thank you for sharing that. This is what's so fruitful about doing this as a group. Is people will see things that you do not see. And I want just to say that, like, these are 2 distinct and different events. I don't think it really. I understand why people say, well, this was clearly just the same thing that happens twice, because obviously this seems like a unique and singular event. There are a lot of close parallels, right? 4,000 versus 5,000. They're in roughly the same region. They're happening roughly the same time of Jesus's ministry. But I think there's absolutely no logical reason we have to think that these are the same event. The number one thing is, what's the likelihood that he's going to feed large multitudes of people more than once from a small amount of food? I don't know. High. The greatest predictor of someone doing, the greatest predictor of future behavior is past behavior. If someone already feeds them once, why wouldn't he feed him again? Why doesn't he do it a third time? That should be the real question. There's nothing logically incoherent about him doing this kind of event. It's not like he used up all of his power or something. It's not like he couldn't do it every single day if he didn't want to. So there's nothing that logically precludes this happening. Yes, Chris?
Are the people who are being fed different in this case? Like, these seem like they could be Gentiles?
I think they are, and I think we're going to get to that.
Okay.
I think that's what, like, St. Hilary of Poitiers commented on this, and that's basically what he said, and other commentators were in line with that. You're jumping the gun. Yes, Esther?
Humans are very food motivated. If you're gonna feed them, they're probably gonna come back.
Yeah.
Like you a little bit more. It doesn't matter now that you made us starve for 3 days. You fed us.
Well, right. And Jesus actually comments on that in the Gospel of John. It says, you're not following me because of my miracles. You're following me because of the food, basically. We're very food motivated and we need to eat all the time, every day. It's a need we have, it's not just one time singular. In fact, so why should we have we have no problem with the fact that he heals all kinds of people all the time, but it's like feeding thousands of people more than once. I don't know about that. Of course, these are just, yeah, exactly. So I think there's no inherent reason to say that these weren't two distinct events. I think the only reason people even say that is just because they sound so similar. But I think actually, if you break it down, there are meaningful differences between the two that are leading to the point that Chris made. Yes.
It also brings the story he's told of the parable he told about the table. Everybody was invited to the table. Almost nobody came, so they went through the streets and gathered anybody who came to the table. These people are coming to the table.
Yeah. And that also points to a very interesting thematic connection, right? I mean, Marsha was bringing up, God nourishes us with food. The kingdom of heaven is like a banquet. Jesus feels like there's this deep thread running through of food imagery, somehow related to how God, nourishes us.
Necessary for life, and so is Christ.
Yeah, exactly. Something along those lines. Exactly. Okay, but I just wanted to. So I'm gonna write it out. There are a couple things that are different. So the first is let's see. Can you see? Can you see that down there? I hope you can. So the first thing is the first one he feeds 5,000. The second one he feeds 4,000. Yeah. Okay. The two. What happened immediately before? The first time where was it written down? The first time it happens in Bethsaida, according to the Gospel of Luke. So the feeding of 5,000 happens in Bethsaida, which we infer is probably a more Jewish populated place. So remember, it's right here. So Bethsaida is where the feeding of the 5,000 happened, and then the feeding of the 4,000 we infer. The evidence is less clear, but it seems like it's happening in the region of the Decapolis, which we said is a Gentile area. And I think that's the crux of the big difference here. The first one was for Jews. The second one was for Gentiles. The first one, they're only hungry for one day. And the second one, it's after 3 days. The first one, there are 5 loaves, 2 fish. The second feeding, the feeding of the 4,000, there are 7 loaves, a few small fish. The first one, I mean, there's a lot more. The first one, they sit on grass. The feeding of 5,000, they sit on grass. The feeding of the 4,000, they sit on the ground. I'm not going to write that just because we have limited space, and that's not one of the ones I found to be more meaningful, although it probably contains meaning. The first one, this is interesting. He blessed the bread. And it's the Greek word eulogeo, which is to bless. In the second one, he gives thanks for the bread. Which is the Greek word eucharisto, which means thank you, but it's where we get the word. It's where we get the word Eucharist. So it's more explicitly, let's say, Eucharistic. The first one, this is a really interesting one. The first one, 12 small baskets remain. And in the second one, 7 large baskets of fragments remain. It's actually 2 different words for basket. And I'm just told Kofinus, 12 Kofinus, verse 7 Spiridas, which is actually where my son's name Spiridon comes from. Just means basket. It's nothing super interesting. This is preceded. What's it preceded by? I can't remember. Yeah, it's preceded by John the Baptist's execution, but there's some other thing that's more immediately there, I think, in the Gospel of Mark or Luke. He sends out the disciples. Yeah, you're right though. It's immediately preceded by the report of the beheading of John the Baptist. Yeah, so it's preceded, but it's preceded by Jesus sending out the 12. And this is preceded by Gentile woman healing the multitudes. So this is another way we're developing that, I think, thematic connection between the first one. When Jesus sends out the 12 disciples, he commands them only to go to the household of Israel. So right before he feeds the 5,000, he's only ministering to the Israelites. And right before he feeds the 4,000, he's actually expanded it, and he's started healing Gentiles as well. So this, I think, gets at what Chris is talking about, which is that it's a movement from Jews to Gentiles. And that's actually what I think. So these pieces of evidence, the fact that the one feeding was in Bethsaida, the other one was in Decapolis, so that's a movement from Jews to Gentiles. The sending out of the 12 to the healing of the Gentile woman's daughter is a movement from Jews to Gentiles. This is, I see it in 2 other places, and I want to see 12 small baskets versus 7 large baskets. Do you guys think of any Jew-Gentile connection in there?
12 tribes, I think.
Yeah.
So the 12 would be the 12 tribes of Israel. What does the number 7 have to do with the Gentiles?
Nations, maybe?
Yeah.
There we go. Oh, you got it. You guys know your Bible better than I give you credit for. So there were 70 nations in the book of Genesis. The total groups of Gentiles, number of nations of the world is 70, which of course is just a multiple of 7. So the number 7 corresponds to the Gentiles. So there's that thematic connection as well. Yes, Esther?
The grass versus ground thing is probably one land was more fertile, the other one was rocky and hard to grow, and the Jews were more prepared for Jesus than the Gentiles likely were. And they also had a lot of conflict between the two. So listening to a Jew from a Gentile perspective was...
It's an interesting one. It's an interesting one what you're saying, the difference between the grass and the ground. The only reason I'd push back is to say that, like, throughout the gospel, especially throughout Matthew's gospel, the Gentiles seem more receptive than the Jews do. So you would expect, if that is the thematic connection being made, you would expect the Gentiles to correspond with the grass and not the Jews. So I don't necessarily quite see it. 5 loaves versus 7 loaves. I'm actually ignoring the fish. I don't think the fish are as significant for this. What's the difference between the 5 loaves and the 7 loaves?
The fulfillment of the law. So the 5 loaves.
It's you see, it's a movement of this number getting larger, a filling up. That's interesting. That's interesting. What about the specific numbers 5 and 7?
Is it books of the law again?
Yeah, 5 is
What's
the books
5?
of the law. So the law, the Pentateuch. Did you say that?
Well, that's what I was kind of saying.
Okay.
The 5 loaves represent.
The 5 loaves represent the books of the law. What are the 7 loaves? What do the 7 loaves represent? What does the number 7 represent? It's not the nations this time.
Perfection.
perfection, completion, that's true. It could be a movement from the law, which is incomplete, to something else which is complete. There's something other which has there's something else in the Bible. There's a sevenfold dimension to it. Yes.
Not necessarily that, but the fish thing might be because if you add the 2 to the 5, then you get the 7, but it's not whole without it. And then the few small fish is maybe a few small laws that go for the world, regardless of who you are. The Jews knew the laws, Gentiles maybe knew some of them, but weren't as obligated to follow them as Jews were.
Interesting. Interesting.
Is the seven bowls of Revelation?
You're getting there. The 7, I think, comes from that imagery.
7 days?
7 days of creation. Yeah, 6 days of creation plus 7th when God
I was
rested.
gonna say something with astronomy. I remember the word was in one of the
It is. There are 7 planets. Yeah, there's 7 heavenly bodies. So if you can include the sun and the moon as planets, don't count Earth, and then count the 5 heavenly bodies that we can see. Those were what the ancient people considered the 7 planets. So they could see Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And those plus the sun and the moon were the 7 planets. So why were they planets? Because they wandered through the sky. They didn't follow, the stars followed a regular orbit, but a planet in Greek means wanderer, and they would not always move in a regular orbit. They had exhibited what's sometimes called retrograde motion. Yes, Marcus?
Oh, my answer for 7 was going to be I think that's the number of churches that Paul writes to, like the major church
It's the
communities.
number of churches John writes to in Revelation. You guys, yeah, these are all.
John writes to in Revelation.
Yes,
Okay.
it is. It's actually, the number 7 is associated with the Holy Spirit. The number 7 is associated with the Holy Spirit. That's also in the book of Revelation. That's why I said you guys were close. But Isaiah, in Isaiah chapter 11, says, well, he's referring to the Messiah. It says, there shall come forth a rod from the root of Jesse, and a flower shall grow out of his foot. The Spirit of God shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and godliness, the Spirit of fear of God shall fill him. So he lists 7 characteristics of the Spirit, and that's actually repeated. If any of you were good, Baptists or non-denominational Christians growing up, you have the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit, right? Love, gentleness, patience, understand. I can't remember off the top of my head because I'm unfortunately an Orthodox. But the number 7 is associated with the Holy Spirit. So it shows up in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. So you have the Jews being nourished with the law. You have the Gentiles being nourished with the Spirit. You see, there's a movement from the law to grace. And that's part of the overall thrust of the Old Testament to the New Testament. And that's why, again, we're talking about a deep thematic connection. And it's like, yeah, okay, if it was just like 1 or 2, well, it was just in Bethsaida and Decapolis, who knows about that, right? But when you add up all of the different changes, it actually looks a lot more intentional, and it looks a lot more meaningful. And this again goes back to what we were talking about before, which is that a lot of the symbolism of the Bible, it's kind of cumulative. It doesn't come from just one passage or one soundbite. It comes from getting a familiarity with the text and really understanding, okay, how does God communicate through the scriptures? And this is what I've said before, is that the scriptures in some way are like a mirror of your spiritual state. You look in and you see your own spiritual state reflected back at you. So if you read the Bible with just, no faith at all, and you're just like, this is a stupid ancient text from stupid ancient people, then you're going to look at this like, oh, well, clearly they just mixed up 4,000, 5,000. They just doubled the same event twice, because they were dumb and they didn't know any better. And so clearly this couldn't have literally happened. If you go in with the eyes of faith and say, no, this is a message. It's got something to tell me. There's some meaning here. And you actually start to dig, you'll actually see it. And it's not just 1 or 2 things here and there, but I think it really starts to paint this coherent picture. And of course, like we were saying before, it actually links all the way back to the text of Isaiah in the Old Testament. It actually links forward too to the book of Revelation, to these other things we were talking about. This thread of meaning, of motifs, runs through the whole Bible. And that's why it's the Bible is fascinating, because all of these books were written by different authors in different places and different times. And yet there is something that coheres. There is something that runs through the entire thing. Why? Because these things were all written by God, ultimately, right? This is what divine inspiration is. It's this one unifying voice that speaks through the different voices. Yeah. Did you have something you wanted to say? Josh, did you have something you wanted to say?
I decided not to because it was totally going to derail us.
Okay. Too late for that, man. Okay. So, but again, so he feeds multitudes in the wilderness. It's another self-identification with the gods of Israel, but it's also a theme, and it was building throughout the entire Gospel of Matthew chapter 15. God is adding Gentiles to his covenant. Okay, he's opening up. He is making the Gentiles the new people of Israel. God bless you guys. Have a nice night. So there's something big going on, and it lines up, like we said, with the book of Acts. God abolishes the food law and then expands the covenant to include other people. Okay. Lord, now let your servant depart in peace according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation of the Gentiles and glory for your people Israel. Amen. God bless all of you. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm going to turn off the recording. I'll hang out a little bit.